Female serial killers are relatively rare. Even rarer are those who exclusively target children. One such monster was Zhanna Weber, a French woman. She was responsible for strangling more than 10 infants, including 3 of her own. Zhanna Weber was born in a small fishing village in Brittany in 1874. At 14, she left home and went to Paris. In 1893, she met Zhanna Weber and married him. They lived in the poor neighborhood of Goutte d'Or, where every other person bore the surname Weber due to family connections. Here, Zhanna gave birth to a son and then 2 daughters. The family barely made ends meet, and Zhanna's husband often drank, but this was how almost all their neighbors lived. The deadly massage. In 1903, tragedy struck the family. Both girls died. Neighbors believed that her unexpressed maternal love needed an outlet, so they weren't surprised when Zhanna offered to babysit their children. She was often left in charge of kids while parents were at work or busy with household chores. No one was alarmed by the fact that not all of these children survived. Zhanna might have remained above suspicion for a long time if not for an incident when a young woman rushed into the Bretonneau hospital with a barely breathing child in her arms. Dr. Sion diagnosed edema of the throat mucosa. However, he noticed a red mark on the boy's neck. The doctor decided to question the little patient's mother about what had happened. Charles Weber recounted that she, her son Maurice, and her friend Pierrette had visited Zhanna Weber that morning. Zhanna, feeling unwell, asked the women to run some errands. They agreed, but once on the street, Pierrette remembered she'd forgotten her wallet in Zhanna's apartment, so she went back. Charles waited downstairs, then went up too. There she saw Pierrette struggling with Zhanna, trying to wrest Maurice from her hands. The boy was already blue and wheezing terribly, so his mother grabbed him and ran to the hospital. After hearing this account, Dr. Sion re-examined the child and became convinced that the marks on the child's neck were signs of strangulation. As a precaution, he asked Charles Weber if anything similar had happened before. To his astonishment, she naively replied, "Yes, in the last 4 weeks, 4 children in the house died of suffocation." The doctor immediately informed the police commissioner. The next day, Zhanna Weber was called in for questioning. Turned out she was involved in all 4 tragic incidents. The first was 18-month-old Georgette, Pierre Weber's daughter. While Pierre was at work and the girl's mother was doing laundry in the communal washroom, Zhanna was babysitting. A neighbor heard the girl's screams and rushed to get Georgette's mother. She ran home to find her daughter lying on the bed. Zhanna Weber was leaning over her, compressing the girl's chest. When the mother cried out, "What are you doing?" Zhanna Weber, as if coming out of a trance, mumbled, "I'm reviving her heart with massage." After a while, the girl's breathing became more regular, and Zhanna claimed that the attack had passed thanks to her massage. The reassured mother went back to the laundry room, but when she returned home half an hour later, little Georgette was no longer breathing. As Zhanna explained, there had been another choking attack, and her massage hadn't helped this time. The second death occurred 10 days later. Zhanna Weber was looking after Suzanne, the 3-year-old sister of the recently deceased Georgette. A neighbor ran to their father, who was working nearby, saying that Suzanne was choking. Pierre Weber rushed home. The girl was lying on the bed, her face was black, and her arms and legs were convulsing. But when Pierre picked her up and brought her to the window, she came to. Convinced that his daughter had recovered, he returned her to Zhanna and left. Not even 15 minutes passed before the neighbor came running to him again, saying that Suzanne had died. On March 26th, little Germaine Weber perished. Zhanna was also babysitting her when the girl supposedly had a choking fit. On the day of Germaine's funeral, Zhanna Weber's 7-year-old son, Marcel, suddenly fell ill. A few hours later, he unexpectedly suffocated, allegedly due to diphtheria complications. New victims. During the interrogation of Jean's relatives and neighbors, Inspector Corrette discovered that there were other infants who had died in this woman's care. Investigator Lade issued an arrest warrant for Zhanna Weber, and on April 15th, she was sent to prison. Experts determined that all the children's deaths resulted from asphyxiation. It seemed unbelievable that a sane woman could do this, so Jean was sent for psychiatric evaluation. However, she was deemed mentally competent, allowing her to stand trial. The trial took place on January 29, 1906. It seemed that nothing could save the Goutte d'Or killer, as journalists dubbed Jean, but the notoriously controversial lawyer Henri Robert took up her defense. He managed to confuse the prosecution's witnesses, including the doctors. As a result, Zhanna Weber was acquitted, and she disappeared from Paris. In the spring of 1907, a doctor named Papazogla was urgently called by a peasant named Bavouzet to attend to his sick son, Auguste. When the doctor reached the Bavouzet home, the 9-year-old boy had already died. The owner's live-in partner, a plump, round-faced woman named Molinette, had already washed the child and dressed him in a clean shirt. Since the doctor couldn't understand what the boy had been ill with based on the father's account, he decided to examine the body. He noticed suspicious bruises on Auguste's neck, so he refused to issue a death certificate. The police sent the body for an autopsy. Pathologist Charles Audie concluded that the hematomas on the boy's neck exactly matched the collar of his shirt. In his report, he wrote that Auguste Bavouzet's death was due to natural causes and resulted from convulsions caused by irritation of the cerebral membrane. The boy's sisters didn't believe this. They searched through their stepmother's belongings and found Parisian newspapers with articles about the trial of the Goutte d'Or killer. To their amazement, they recognized their stepmother Jean Molinette in the photographs. In reality, she was Zhanna Weber. The girls took these newspapers to the gendarmerie inspector. Caught in the act. Investigator Bellet opened a case and ordered pathologists to conduct a second autopsy. The two doctors who performed it found no evidence of natural causes of death. Zhanna Weber Molinette was arrested for the second time. But lawyer Henri Robert once again came to her defense and portrayed Jean as a victim of police provocation. He secured the support of Georges Bonjean, the president of the French Society for the Protection of Children. Bonjean publicly promised to employ Weber in a children's home as soon as she was released from custody. The investigation was halted, and Jean was freed. The killer not only escaped punishment but also got a job. In January 1908, Zhanna Weber went to Orgeville, where she became a nanny in a children's home. By February, she was caught attempting to get into bed with one of the children and strangle him. The nanny was quietly fired without the police being informed. However, she suddenly turned herself in to the police and confessed to killing children. But then she recanted her confession, explaining that she had falsely accused herself to live in warmth. And Jean was released again. In May of the same year, guests at a hotel in the town of Commercy caught her and accused her of murdering the hotel owner's son. Jean, who introduced herself as Madame Boucher, had invited Marcel Poirot to her room to play, and half an hour later, the child's screams were heard. Hotel guests and the boy's father broke down the door to the room, but the boy was already dead. Marcel was lying on Jean's bed, his face and neck bloodied, with bloody handkerchiefs strewn about. To all questions, the woman replied that she knew nothing and asked for a lawyer. However, this time, assessing the losing situation, Henri Robert refused to defend her. Professor Émile Parissot from the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Nancy conducted an autopsy and stated that the The boy's death resulted from asphyxia caused by external violence. This time, Zhanna Weber was not put on trial. In October 1908, she was committed to an insane asylum, where she was kept in solitary confinement. The woman refused to communicate with relatives and staff and remained in a state of depression. In 1918, she committed suicide by strangling herself with her own hands.